The one thing you need to do in the first place to look at is what information are you capturing when someone raises their hand and says, I'm interested in your product. And that's typically through some type of lead form. I request a demo. I want to talk to sales, something like that. If all you're capturing is their typical information, name, phone number, etc., that attribution will be lost. There are numerous items that can easily be set up as an example of an absolute most basic. If you do any form of marketing, you might have come across like UTM parameters, right? What is your source? HubSpot, Salesforce form, whatever. Put a hidden field on that form to capture the source that someone's landing on your landing page with in the URL. There's more complexity than that. Be happy to talk. That's probably the episode follow-up 20 or something like that. But if you're not capturing basic info about how that person found you, even as the last touch point, which isn't full attribution, but we don't have to get into those weeds, but some type of capture that says, when this lead is then marked as qualified in Salesforce, in CRM, and then marked as customer and revenue and all of that, what in that record can I look at that says what brought them to the website? If that little bit isn't there, you're never going to know what actually works.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang. All right, so here's your opportunity to find those things that you have lost, or at least maybe do some recovery, because we have Brian Walker on the show with us today, and he's going to tell us a little bit about why half of your B2B marketing budget is being wasted, how it's being wasted, what it's being wasted on. I would dare to say Brian could probably even share with us instances on where maybe even more than half of that budget that's getting wasted. Brian, welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Now, okay, so I've given our listeners just a little bit of insight into what we're going to be talking about. But before we get into the depths of it, if you could share a little bit with your background and your experience.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. So I work at StatWax. I head up strategy and operations. We are a full service digital ad agency, and we specialize in the B2B space. So if anyone has seen firsthand how those budgets may be used inefficiently and what can be cleaned up, it's definitely our team. We've been around for going on a decade now, and we really exist to try and serve our B2B and our SaaS clients who come to us and say, how can I ensure I'm getting more leads that are actually leading to something? How can I stop throwing my money away on people who say they're interested and bog down our sales team and don't actually produce action so that we don't run as efficiently as possible? And, from everything from CRO and landing page design all the way to the execution on the paid side and strategy around ads, channels, data science, and modeling, we try and tackle that on behalf of our clients.
Well, as you're saying that, I start thinking about, the complexity of it, one thing. The other thing is when I start looking at, even firsthand experience as well as working with clients, I started seeing this decline in regards to effectiveness prior to us having the lockdown. And then the lockdown and coming out of the lockdown, things were kind of just off kilter for those first couple of months because of the shock factor. But then it became a scenario where, everybody is trying to find more success in regards to their digital marketing, whether it was organic or paid. And the amount of noise has become just intense. And then it's also all the costs associated with all of the paid, keywords. Everybody's like, well, go for the long tail. Heck, the long tails are even expensive now, right? Mm-hmm. So I would dare to say you'd probably find more people connecting and contacting you and being interested in what you're doing because the stakes are much higher than they used to be.
Absolutely. There's so much noise out there. And ironically, a lot of it's driven by the fact that all of the big players, Google, Facebook, et cetera, are going all in on this automation piece. Google is saying, forget the keywords. Tell us who your audience is. Give us some ad copy and let us run it. Let us find the best people based on whatever they're searching. Well, that's all fine and good. But when you stop choosing your own keywords and choosing your own journey, suddenly everyone's playing in the same space. And we're hoping that Google, of all places, is going to control that effectively. And they do good at it, but all of a sudden there's so much more competition for the same amount of ad space as always before, so many other platforms to possibly lose your way on, and so much more data to have to make heads or tails of to make the right decisions and cut through some of that noise.
Well, and the cost to even do that, like I was saying, has gone up. I mean, ad platform revenues are continuing to increase, not decrease.
Yeah, Google's making a few dollars from advertisers out there based on last time I saw them put out some earnings. And I don't think the Amazons and Facebooks aren't too far behind either. So it is a lucrative game. That is for sure.
Well, it is. And I think for me, oftentimes I think we lose sight of that. In other words, we don't own our own identities online, whether we're personal or business. It's the platform that we are on, which owns that identity when it comes down to it. Mm-hmm. And what we choose to do on these platforms, even if it has to do with, paid advertising, and you even mentioned the organic piece and things like that, ultimately, it's not our platform. We have to play by their rules. We have to play their game. We have to, make sure that we're not in violation. We have all these different, rules and factors, and it's become so complex. But ultimately, you have people who are at the very top of the organization who are sitting there saying, am I just blowing money out the window or throwing it out the window or burning it? And what part of my money and my investment, is really garnering any value? And that's the question that you're really answering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, if I'm a CMO at, a SaaS unicorn, I trust someone somewhere is keeping tabs on the rules to run ads on Google or Facebook. What I need to know is, what's our bottom line? Are we getting more customers? Yes or no? And based on that, what should we be doing? In going to bed at night, hoping I'm not worrying that we just threw a bunch of money in the ocean and hopefully some customers, wash up on shore and they're the right ones that we want.
Right. And our sales group isn't getting, totally disgusted with our marketing group and saying, these marketing qualified leads suck.
Exactly. Can someone give me someone who actually wants to be a customer, please, and tell me, what we're doing over there? The marketing versus sales teams debate is one for the ages.
So you've identified really there's 5 things that you often find that are contributing to either half or maybe even more, of this marketing budget just being burnt. So if you could just kind of run us through what you find most often.
For sure. I would say first up, and probably the biggest driving all of it, to use the kind of dreaded A word, but attribution, which I know is such a cliche term, but with so much noise in the digital space and the opportunity to be on so many channels, so many touch points, not having visibility into exactly how each of those ultimately helps produce a customer is so detrimental. And we see it all the time. I spent all this money on display and paid social and putting together these slick email blasts and all of that. And maybe we got more customers, but sales is telling me we got more customers because they speak really well to the leads. Marketing saying, oh, it's because of them. What's going on? Building out an analysis system and tying CRM to website analytics, to ads data, tying all that together and tracking the right information so that you can effectively say, when we ran this tactic up here in the funnel, it trickled down to these users searching for this and becoming these customers. That is where you get to go to leadership and say, see, this is why we keep spending this much each month on these high funnel efforts or on this connected TV video buy or these email blasts, et cetera. And so many places have shockingly little reporting and attribution that helps actually tie those touch points together. And without that, you can be really good at digital tactics and executing, but you're still throwing a dart at a dartboard while blindfolded, essentially. You're hoping this did play a positive role and hoping it continues and it's not an anomaly.
Well, let's be clear here, okay? Because I dare to say when you start talking about this type of visibility in regards to attribution, many of us are familiar with the drop down box that says, "How did you hear about us?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you're saying is, that's an old school method and way of trying to answer this particular question. That you find if people are doing that, yes, they in fact are burning money, because the whole self-reporting element associated with that, there's no reliability into it. What we have to be able to do is put mechanisms in place by which it's essentially just being tracked and tabulated, and then therefore we have visibility into it without that type of intervention or self-reporting. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great first step. And once upon a time, was definitely a great way to quickly attribute some things. But your average layperson, even very tech savvy ones, aren't going to necessarily do the backwards math to say, oh, I searched for that company because I saw their banner ad on that news website 2 weeks ago. They're just going to say Google search. Did they click an ad or use your organic? Is your paid or your SEO working better for you on your ROI now? And all of a sudden, it becomes just this spaghetti bowl of touch points, and you still can't really figure out what ultimately drove that. With that attribution piece, being able to say, okay, on average, it takes 2 weeks after that, display initiative to really filter down into some specific searches. And then they searched for some of our competitors as well, but we were able to hook them with some reviews on G2 Crowd. And then they came back on this webinar. All of a sudden you get that roadmap and you start to understand what content you should place where and how you should expect to need to invest in it to scale it the most efficient way possible.
Okay, so that's the first one. Talk about attribution. Where do we go from there? What's the next?
So the next one actually goes back to what you had mentioned previously, that sales versus marketing, that battle royale that sometimes tends to happen. Sales does not want to be bogged down with SQLs that don't qualify anywhere, or excuse me, with MQLs that don't qualify anywhere past that. And marketing often, we find, doesn't realize the value that the sales team holds in the conversations they're having. They're looking at data. They're looking, even if they have CRM visibility, who closed and who didn't, let's pull levers that way. The first thing we always recommend doing is sit down with your best salespeople, the ones who are really having the best conversations. Don't ask them what the value props are that are convincing people to buy. Ask them, the ones who we lost, why didn't they choose us? Why did they reach out and not move any further? Figure out the common threads between the pain points that are leading folks elsewhere, and proactively build out marketing to address that beforehand. If I have 3 key pain points that are driving qualified leads somewhere else, we'll build landing pages that speak to that. We'll put that messaging in ad copy. If someone searches for reviews or alternatives, things like that, or even pain points, we'll position that first and foremost and try and address that before they're having conversations and realize it's a pain point and go elsewhere. And oftentimes marketing gets stuck in their silo of lead volume was our KPI. We drove lead volume. It's you. If you couldn't get them to convert, we're getting good cost leads. And it doesn't work that way. You have to be cohesive in why are they not converting? The ones who are the best, how do we get more of them? And how do we speak to what they found valuable and what pain points they had addressed?
Okay, so oftentimes when you start looking at doing, that type of strategy, I start thinking about the practical application and applying it and looking at what, the investment and effort is within an organization. So I'll give you a couple examples. You hear many stories about all of the sales collateral that is being created by the marketing group. None of it gets used by sales. That's one issue. Another one being when you start looking at the, calendar, when you start looking at the work and that's been identified, a lot of it is totally missing the funnel mark, right? So you're creating all this content, for example, up at the very, very top of the funnel. However, we have this huge, massive gap, and we're essentially using duct tape and bubble gum to try to, filter in getting people down to the lower end of the funnel. So how does all of that, become a scenario to where you are adding value, to this overall strategy, and then therefore tactical work plan.
Yeah, it's so easy to get, as you said, bogged down in creating this content up there that's kind of promoting the brand and your thought leadership, and not realizing what else is required in the journey. And so one of the other things that we see happen so often is just a lack of analysis and a lack of looking at what that full journey is of the best customers. Even if you don't have a great data system in place, if you at least have some website analytics and are having some sales conversations you can tap into and ask some questions about, what is truly resonating on average, what is truly a part of a customer journey more often than not. We find so many times that a client might put gobs of time and energy and investment into all this blog content and even these webinars. And we look and realize the only thing people are really looking at every single time before becoming a customer is your pricing page and your reviews and testimonials, and maybe this piece of thought leadership. Don't focus on these, or this resonated really well, and a journey through these pieces of content was present in all of your best customer journeys of the past year. Let's maybe focus on writing more content around that theme specifically, rather than trying to be everywhere at once, analyzing what on average pops up more often than not in your best prospect to customer journeys, and building more around that. And ultimately, more times than not, it'll actually result in more efficiency, because you'll realize you've been putting a lot of eggs in the wrong baskets, and you just need to focus on these few core things. And then you'll realize what's missing in the marketing as well. More often than not, the marketing focuses on thought leadership. We've got all this great content. Let's put it in some LinkedIn carousel ads and use it in an ABM strategy and promote these webinars. And we'll take a look and realize you're never following up with remarketing that highlights maybe a price break or customer testimonials that validate for you what your product does and things of that nature. And if those are missing, all of a sudden you're missing that key piece of the journey that is nudging your prospects along. Working that into the mix and seeing how that plays out can make the whole thing more efficient and stop you from having to invest in both the creation and marketing of things that just weren't necessary.
As you're saying that, I'm sorry, I had to chuckle a couple of times, because I started thinking about, what people perceive, thought leadership to be, and, influencer, strategies and all that to be. And then ultimately, I think, for what I heard you say is that, hey, guess what, guys? The real secret is, it ain't about you. It's about them.
There's so much marketing is me. And the ones who are doing it so well, you'll realize on their website and everything, they're trying to talk about themselves or say, here's what we do at all. It's here's what customer XYZ was able to do because of this.
Okay, so talk about the alignment component and the congruency between sales and marketing, and building that bridge, and improving the whole concepts associated with MQLs, SQL, and getting conversions. But then we have to roll into the other thing, is when we started looking at number 3, which you state has to do about a little bit more, into this whole visibility thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's the data's there, and there's a story that it can tell. And it's very easy to see it as just this ream of data and say, I'm not a data person, or I don't know how to make heads or tails of these metrics and this analytics and all, but there are stories to tell in it. And understanding not just who became a customer and what they did, but who became the best customer, because not all leads and not all customers are created equal. And if you start to dive in, and as long as you can make, if we go back to that attribution piece, as long as you can make the connection between marketing and website journey to this product or this purchase tier or this lifetime value, you'll be able to back out and say our best revenue and our best chance for further growth comes from replicating a journey that looks like this. And once you can do that, unless your addressable market is 5 people large, everything aside from that, once you have that roadmap, rinse and repeat it seems very simple, but you can put a marketing strategy in place where you know every dollar going into that and every piece of content and messaging you're serving up is backed by historical performance for you as a company to be expected to perform again, because you've seen it happen. You're no longer throwing things at the wall and saying, I hope 6 of these channels work, but I know 6 others won't. It's proven. Your customers, your best ones, have already told you and shown you what it took to get them to that point. Doing more of that and leveraging the platforms that allow you to hone in on that audience and promote that piece of content, that'll help you shape your marketing strategy right there.
Well, and as you're saying that, I have to start even thinking about, my, I often talk about ICP, my ideal customer profile. Some people may talk about personas and things like that, but I think to me, an ICP has a lot more depth to it. I'm looking at a lot of different factors when I start thinking at that customer profile piece. So then it's taking that ideal customer journey piece and then looking at the different segments or different targets or different ICPs I have, but then also knowing there are going to be some nuances. Not so like, just give you like a rough example. I may be going after physicians and they're a particular ICP. I may be going after entrepreneurs and they're a particular ICP. Those aren't the same.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also even a difference. I mean, I was talking to one guy who actually works in the healthcare space, and he said, oh, even when I'm starting to talk about working with orthodontists versus, some other type of, tooth related doctor, he goes, they're just different types of people. So I think when we even start talking about trying to replicate, certain, scenarios or certain models like you're talking about, hopefully you'll get greater insight into those differences, which can even help you to further, change, the particular model that you think is going to work.
Absolutely. And that therein lies the best story that all of that data can tell, because as you said, so much marketing is me, but really what it needs to be is who specifically am I talking to and how do they consume content? How do they make decisions? And that's actually perfectly set up for that fourth point that we see so often, which is this lack of understanding about who actually are the ideal buyers for my company, for my product. So many times, especially in the SaaS space, we see a client think, oh, my buyer is the CMO because they sign the checks. They are the ultimate sayer of, yes, we need this product, or no, we don't. But you start to dive into what that full journey to sign that enterprise client actually was, and you realize that CMO delegated to someone 4 layers beneath them 6 months ago to find a solution to this problem. And they were the first ones to come in as a lead and demo the product and talk to sales. And then they looped in their boss and then their boss's boss. And here's how that progressed. If your ABM strategy or your email or outreach strategy is just trying to get a CMO of a billion-dollar SaaS company on the phone, good luck with that. You need to start down here with the folks on the ground who are benefited from the solution, being solved, but also understand what they're going to have to tell to whom about it to keep that journey going. And so understanding not just who's involved in that customer journey, but as you said, what about them lends itself to marketing and what material and content is so vitally important, because so many people in the B2B space want to just market based on what problems they perceive their product solving. And that, even though it's about your singular product, is still a blanket statement. 2 different people in the same industry might have wildly different views of whether that's a problem to solve or not, and where their role is in solving that problem at their organization. And so they need to see 2 wildly different marketing journeys to understand why they should care. And oftentimes that delineation between those personas and who they're about and what their role in that journey is what doesn't get looked at or really gets lost in the shuffle of trying to just deploy a marketing strategy.
As you're saying that, I start thinking about a delineation between finding out where the point is at which You have people who are responsible for the organization versus those and the operation of the organization versus those that are in the operation of the organization. It's two very different things. Mm-hmm. And size of the organization is one factor. Culture of the organization is another factor. I mean, like you talk about that $1 billion company. Well, that $1 billion company, I may have one that has 5 different business units, and they actually work autonomously and they make decisions autonomously. So therefore, going, at the very top parent level, that's not going to help you any. Where if I start, looking at another organization, they may not operate that way. They may operate in a shared resources type of environment. So that therefore, it's a different person who I would contact. So I think all of this nuance, really, if we're not careful, will lead to the situation where, you're burning away half your budget because you're trying to deploy the exact same strategy for every single organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then knowing that that's not going to be efficient, you factor in that you can't see which parts of it worked or not. And all of a sudden it's a recipe for, well, as marketers, we see customers growing, so we assume we have a role in it. Let's keep feeding this whole fire. And that might work for a time, but at some point, someone's going to need to look at the numbers and say, couldn't 60% of what we're spending be better allocated to something else and see the same results? Can anyone justify that for me? Why or why not?
Well, I think that leads us into the next one, right? Because beautifully, awesome segue, because I would dare to say the vast majority of organizations are in that quandary and level of frustration right now, because so many things have been taken away in regards to the way that we used to do business. People were asking me if I was going to this one conference next week that, prior to COVID, I probably went for almost 10 years straight. And I'm like, nope, not doing that anymore. Mm-hmm. And they're like, why? I said, because business doesn't happen there anymore. I mean, it just doesn't. And so what they're saying is like, well, the face-to-face is platinum. I'm like, sure, I agree. But look how much time I'm taking away to go there. And then all these other particular factors, I'm like, it's just a foolish thing to do. And so, sure. And part of it is because of your fifth one, is that we have to allocate and be prepared to do what?
We have to test. We have to try new things, which is fifth for a reason, because what we didn't want to do is start out with everyone hearing, you should spend more, because that's kind of ironic based on what we've been talking about, right? If you don't know what you're doing, spend more. Terrible advice, but let's put a caveat on it. Testing smartly and failing fast and having visibility into why it worked and why it didn't is the only place scale is going to truly come from. You can take a great paid search strategy and you can whittle it down to spending and maximizing on the absolute best converters and best drivers of customers. But at a certain point, there's a diminishing return there. There are too many different channels out there, too many touch points needed. And so what we often find is the lack of visibility and comfort and confidence in the marketing working and where it's working leads to an inaction to test new things and to try new things, and an inability to sell to leadership why that should happen. So we understand that. And so from like a StatWax perspective, we might come in and say, no testing for the first 60, 90 days. But when we find 30% of spend that you can stop doing because it's proven inefficient, give us half of that to try brand new channels that are not immediately held to ROI. Let us take what you were already spending that we said you don't have to and you're not going to lose anything, and test into places you've never been, because we're going to do that with an eye on the personas we've now helped better understand, an eye on the journey that we can now see and the roadmap it's helped us create. And we're going to look for where your actual buyers and where your ideal journey can best fit on these channels and with these ad formats, pieces of messaging, et cetera, that have not been tried yet. It's not all going to work, but this visibility will allow it to fail quickly so we can see immediately, so you're not shooting blind anymore. But when you find the ones that do work, what would have happened if you never tried those? How many customers would you have never gotten now that you can see what actually did happen? And that concept of selling leadership and sort of saying, we don't know what's working already, but we would love more money to try other new things. That's never going to fly. I'd love to see, the holder of marketing dollars who says, "Yep, that seems like the right way to go." But if you can get all those other pieces in place, it starts to make a lot more sense, through the lens of how do we scale and continue to grow and stay ahead of the curve.
Well, but as you sit there and say that, I would dare to say that probably is what's happening, because, and it's also a reason why, you look at the CMO tenure continues to drop, is because, oh yeah, other people, or this is what we're supposed to be doing. Oh, and therefore, and we're not, and therefore let's put it in place. And well, gosh, it didn't work, right? So, but we don't need to go into that. There's like talking about tons of case studies, and the evidence is for itself, where you can't keep drawing from the same old well and expecting, it to work in the new age of need. But you said something about fail fast, and I want to challenge you and have you maybe, think about this and help me to find greater clarity. Is it that we want to fail fast, or is it really that we want to get the information and iterate fast?
That's a great way to, yes. Testing, I don't consider truly a failure, because that means something else won, right? Everyone always talks about an A/B test and one of them failed. Well, no, one of them performed better than the other. And that means we get to create a new iteration that will perform even better. That's learning and optimizing. So yes, learn and analyze fast is really probably the proper way to refer to that in this day and age, because failure would be you see what didn't work and you just pump more money into it because you don't know any better. That is marketing is probably failing. But the way you describe it, learning and seeing what is and isn't working and iterating out based on that to continue to improve performance and improve scalability, that's the ultimate goal.
Because it seems, there's oftentimes a quick to abandon, type of thing. And for me, and that also gets into that whole status quo bias, thing where people are like, oh, well, we've tried that before. And it's like, well, yeah, I looked at what you tried and it sucked.
Yeah, I tried paid search. It didn't work for us. Well, why? Oh, well, we had 2 broad keywords running and we pumped all our money into that.
And we had no negatives. Okay. We had
nothing. And also we didn't own our brand trademark, so everyone bid on that too. So yeah, there's always layers to that story for sure. There are platforms that won't work for certain companies, especially in the B2B space with very specific personas and audiences. But more often than not, the abandonment happens before anyone really peels back why wasn't it performing to expectations.
Okay, so now that leads me into, and we kind of hit on this a little bit, the level of complexity that we're currently all being faced with in regards to the enormity of digital marketing, and then now the continued growing of B2B digital marketing, right? And so it's people will arguably say, well, it's not digital marketing, it's just marketing. Okay, fine. So now that your B2B marketing now has a absolute digital requirement and necessity, oftentimes the thought is, well, I can have, just say, for example, Jane take care of that, or Joe take care of that. I think those days are gone. I think the complexity has gotten to the point by which you cannot have, there is no Jane or Joe unicorn out there that can handle all this stuff. It's not possible.
No, not at all. That's a hard mindset for a lot of folks still to understand, because I could go to my neighborhood right now and probably cherry pick a couple guys who have Google Ads certification and could probably convince a lot of folks that means that they are ultimate paid search experts and all that. And they could be very good at it, but what about the data modeling and analysis? What about the setup of all the different tracking? Are you an expert in how Salesforce or HubSpot work and how to read the different milestones and set it up for success? Copywriting, design, are your landing pages set up to tell that journey that you uncovered in the best possible way? There's so many components to it. And I don't even say that as someone who is trying to run an agency with many of those components. I'm not even saying that to say this is why you need an agency. I'm more saying that as this jack of all trades in the marketing space is more so than ever now a master of none, because there is no possible way for an individual to have that breadth of knowledge across so many different systems that blend statistics and data science with copywriting and personas and analyzing human activities and things like that, and then go in and actually pull the levers and keep up to date on why Google's algorithm changed for SEO or why Facebook doesn't let you target this way on iOS 14 anymore, things like that. It's just too much.
Okay, so then I start sitting here, and I'm even more confused than I was when we started. Right? It's like, okay, you tell me about these 5 things I need to focus in on. You know, a big particular issue associated with, right spending and return on investment, and that I'm probably more than likely just burning half of my B2B marketing budget. Is that, how do I step forward? If I look at all the things and all the complexities that are sitting on my plate, what's the one thing I need to do in order to get right movement?
The one thing you need to do in the first place to look at is, what information are you capturing when someone raises their hand and says, I'm interested in your product? And that's typically through some type of lead form. I request a demo. I want to talk to sales, something like that. If all you're capturing is their typical information, name, phone number, etc., that attribution will be lost. There are numerous items that can easily be set up as an example of an absolute most basic. If you do any form of marketing, you might have come across like UTM parameters, right? What is your source? HubSpot, Salesforce form, whatever. Put a hidden field on that form to capture the source that someone's landing on your landing page with in the URL. There's more complexity than that. Be happy to talk. That's probably, the episode follow-up, 20 or something like that. But if you're not capturing basic info about how that person found you, even as the last touch point, which isn't full attribution, but we don't have to get into those weeds, but some type of capture that says, when this lead is then marked as qualified in Salesforce, in CRM, and then marked as customer and revenue and all of that, what in that record can I look at that says what brought them to the website? If that little bit isn't there, you're never going to know what actually worked. So starting with that is the easiest way, because we would tell a prospective client, ask whoever built your form what hidden information is being captured. If they say, oh, we capture campaign and source medium, awesome. Then we talk to them about click ID and analytics user ID, and we get really deep. If they say, oh, name, zip code, phone number, all right, here's how you can capture information about the digital journey. But no matter what, you're going to have to see post-lead how it's matriculating through the process and have some identifier that tells you where they came from, or that black box will always be there.
Brian Walker, incredible conversation, and man, tons of insights shared. Okay, so how does the B2B DM gang get in touch with you?
So they can find us at statwax.com, STATWAX, or if you prefer email, brian@statwax.com. They keep it very simple, no last names, BRIAN@statwax.com, and I am always happy to chat, always happy to dive into your efforts with you and see what might be working or not. Take a look at the website for you. Don't even have someone check your forms. We'll do that for you and tell you where there might be opportunity. But yeah, would always love to chat with someone.
Brian Walker, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.